Mr. Olson, on July 28, 2020, you signed a public letter attacking the Trump administration for using Department of Homeland Security officers to help protect the federal courthouse in Portland from violent rioters. That letter stated, quote, "Plainclothes officers in unmarked vehicles should be used only in limited capacities and clearly identified circumstances. Crowd control is not among those circumstances." Mr. Olson, on January 6, 2021, did the Department of Justice or FBI have any plainclothes officers among the crowd at the Capitol?
Senator, I'm not aware of whether or not there were plainclothes officers in among the crowd at the Capitol on January 6th.
Did any plainclothes officers enter the Capitol on January 6th?
I don't know the answer to that, Senator.
Mr. Olson, I got to say your answers to many questions today are disappointing because they boil down to essentially, I don't know. Did you prepare for this hearing? Did you know this hearing was happening before this morning?
The direct answer, yes, I prepared extensively, Senator. Many of the questions are about specific facts that I don't have.
Well, I mean, what was the
I do think that one of the most important points that I would emphasize is, it's against a general matter. It's not appropriate to comment on ongoing investigations.
Well, I didn't ask you about an ongoing investigation. I just flipped to the cover of my binder here. It says the title of this hearing is "The Domestic Terrorism Threat 1 Year After January 6th. The Attorney General has repeatedly said this is one of the department's highest priority. You're testifying at a hearing about the domestic terrorism threat 1 year after January 6th, and you can't answer questions about how many people have been charged for events arising out of January 6th. Would you go into a briefing with the Attorney General, your boss, and not be able to answer such basic questions?
On the last question you asked, Senator, over 700 people have been charged in connection with January 6th. About 325 have been charged with serious felonies in connection with attacks on the Capitol.
10 minutes ago, Senator Cruz asked you this series of questions, and you didn't have the answer. You didn't have the answer for how many people have been charged with violent offenses or nonviolent offenses and so on and so forth. Have you been given the answer in the last 10 minutes?
I'm sorry if I misunderstood, Senator, but I believe that Senator Cruz was asking me about other events, not the January 6th event.
Okay, let's turn to another issue that came up earlier today, Ray Epps. During the January 6th riots last year, Mr. Epps was caught on video several times. He seemed to encourage people to enter the Capitol, to break down police barriers. Video from the rallies, or from the rally down the National Mall early that day shows him doing the same thing. Video even from the night before shows him encouraging people to enter the Capitol. Ray Epps lives in Arizona. He didn't exactly go underground after January 6th. He even gave an interview to local media, and he was well known to the Department of Justice. He was on the FBI's Capitol Riot Most Wanted page just days after January 6th. In fact, he was one of the first 16 suspects added to that Most Wanted page on your website. It does not appear that he's been arrested or charged in any offense. In July, without explanation, he was removed from the FBI's Most Wanted page. Mr. Olson, who is Ray Epps, and why was he removed from the FBI's Most Wanted list?
Senator, I don't have any information about that individual. I would defer to Ms. Sanborn for any additional.
So this is, it gets back to what I meant earlier, like asking if you're prepared for this hearing. You're the Assistant Attorney General for National Security. You run the National Security Division. The department has said that these January 6 prosecutions are one of their highest priorities. This is a man who was on the Most Wanted page for 6 months. Do you really expect us to believe that you've never heard of the name Ray Epps or you don't know anything about him?
I simply don't have any information at all, Senator, about that individual.
What other suspects on the Most Wanted page do you know nothing about?
Senator,
Let me ask you this: Can you name anyone else on? Can you name anyone else on the Department of Justice's most wanted page?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't hear your question.
Can you name anyone else on the Department of Justice's most wanted page from the January 6th riots?
I'm not familiar with the most wanted page. No, I'm not familiar with that.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to have to seek our answers elsewhere, but this has not been a stellar performance today.
Senator Whitehouse, are you online?
I am.
With the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. This past weekend, when I was home, and whether I was at church or other activities, I would hear from Tennesseans. And they were just so focused on what we were hearing about the Twitter files. They are very concerned and disturbed about the lengths to which the FBI and other government agencies have gone to suppress political free speech online. The documents released to date especially give them pause because it shows them what it looks like when the power of big tech and the power of the deep state work together against the American people. Now, most people understand that the government and law enforcement sometimes work with private companies. And when it comes to removing things like material depicting child sexual abuse from their platforms, that's something that tech platforms should be doing. But in this case, they were working together to suppress free speech on behalf of a political narrative, a viewpoint that they held, and words they disagreed with. The existence of the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force is not a secret. The agency created it in 2017 to counteract foreign influence operations targeting the United States. If you don't look too closely, the task force seems like a reasonable response to an emerging threat to our nation's security. But in reality, the entire scheme is predicated on the notion that a threat is whatever the task force deems it to be. In a batch of documents and reporting released on Sunday, we learned that in the months leading up to the 2020 election, the task force became frustrated after Twitter employees indicated they hadn't seen much to suggest that foreign countries like Russia were using the platform to spread propaganda. So, what did the FBI do? They went on a fishing expedition and pressured decision makers within the company to abandon the notion that this was about national security. To that end, Twitter decided to let the FBI kick the door off the hinges and widen the scope of their own influence online at the expense of the integrity of the platform. And I say widen this because the FBI, along with the Department of Homeland Security and the intelligence community, had already engaged in a certain amount of mission creep when it came to investigating threats online. Both the FBI and DHS routinely pre-flagged content for moderation and sent the names of accounts directly to the FBI's contacts at Twitter. Several of the accounts sent for review were suspended or shadow banned, yet most of them weren't foreign propaganda at all. They were relatively low engagement accounts tweeting satire and jokes, and accounts of citizens. Many of them were owned by regular people who were obviously on the conservative side of the political spectrum. The FBI responded to this reporting by claiming that they often work with private companies to provide information on foreign malign influence attempts. But as we have seen in black and white, most of the moderation requests made by the government didn't fall into that category. Instead, They focused on low follower accounts owned by ordinary Americans who tweeted opinions that the government did not agree with. These revelations prompt our next question. How did an allegedly serious investigation into influence campaigns devolve into a censorship free-for-all? To find your answer, you have to look all the way back to the 2016 Russian election interference story. These allegations were used as pretext to justify the blatant censorship covered in the Twitter Files reporting. In November 2020, the FBI used that pretext to justify flagging so many examples of what they called possible violatable content that Twitter employees were overwhelmed. The story still had steam in 21 when DHS published a brief with their assessment that, and I'm quoting, Russian malign influencers probably will increasingly use U.S. social media platforms that offer more permissive operating environments, end quote. As I said, that is there, the DHS quote. And of course, it was that pretext that led to the most infamous instance of government-driven censorship in recent memory. When Twitter suppressed the New York Post story coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop, the platform made it clear they had done so because the story was the product of Russian meddling. Of course, this weekend's reporting revealed that Twitter employees had repeatedly informed the FBI that they had no evidence of significant Russian meddling. Twitter told the FBI repeatedly they had no significant evidence of Russian meddling. But under pressure from the government, they chose to buy into an influence operation that originated much closer to home. The FBI had primed the pump months before the laptop story broke by telling tech CEOs to expect hacking operations targeting people associated with political campaigns. They also planted seeds with elected officials and the media, and even hosted a tabletop exercise that mimicked one of those hacking operations. One person they identified as a potential target, Hunter Biden. Yes, it was Hunter Biden. And of course, his property had been in FBI custody since December 2019. So when the Post broke the story, it was easy for Twitter to take the easy way out and run with the FBI narrative rather than relying on evidence proving the story was a real scandal and not something cooked up by a Russian hacker. At this point in the story, it has become crystal clear that there is a much bigger agenda in play. When DHS tried to get away with creating an official disinformation governance board, I almost didn't believe what I was seeing. Here was an official government agency using national security as a pretext to censor political speech that was at odds with the Biden administration's policies. Fortunately, that effort collapsed under scrutiny, but they didn't need an official panel of bureaucrats to keep up the pressure on these companies. Back in July 21, I sent a letter to the White House after we discovered that their staff was in regular touch with social media platforms to suppress speech regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. I figured the American people had a right to know what criteria they were using to ask for that level of censorship and what the legal basis for this presumed authority was. Believe it or not, I never got an answer to the letter. And Madam President, I ask that that letter be printed alongside my remarks in the congressional record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. The American people aren't going to let this one go. I know Tennesseans are not going to let this go. They have hard evidence that big tech and the deep state have repeatedly suppressed legal speech to control political discourse in this country. These companies cannot be trusted to do what's right, and we as lawmakers can no longer wait for them to regulate themselves. They have proven over the past decade they will not regulate themselves. This is why I fought so hard to pass legislation requiring privacy, safety, data security protections for kids and adults. This year, the Kids Online Safety Act and the Open App Markets Act and nationwide privacy legislation have all fallen short of the finish line, which is really disappointing because these are policies that have such strong bipartisan support. And I thank Senator Blumenthal for his partnership on those policies. But I would remind my colleagues that these issues have not gone away, and they are not going away. The American people are waiting to see what we do next. Will we give them a toolbox to protect themselves online, to protect their virtual you? Will we give them the ability to control the apps that they choose to put on their iPhone or their Android? Will we pass legislation to make certain that our social media platforms have to establish a duty of care for our children online? We all know that if you give big tech the opportunity, they will censor. We know that. They will suppress speech in order to favor a narrative that they can control. And they're going to keep doing it until we put them all in check. I yield the floor.
Tôi viết lên đây với tất cả chân thành của lòng tôi trao anh. Ngày nào đã quen nhau vì chung hướng đời mình chót trao nhau nụ cười. Và tình yêu đó tôi đem ép trong tim, dù bụi thời gian có làm mờ đi kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Tôi cũng không bao giờ quên anh. Cho đến hôm nay với nức nở nghẹn ngào, mình mềm lòng xa nhau. Còn đâu những đêm anh dìu tôi lối về buồn kể nhau nghe chuyện đời. Tình mình này chết như lá úa thu rơi, đường trần mồ côi tôi lạnh lùng ôm kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Ngơ ngác trong đêm trường tôi chứa vơi niềm yêu thương. Nhớ lúc chia phôi cầm tay chưa nói hết bao nhiêu niềm thương của tuổi xuân vừa tròn. Xa nhau mấy người không buồn không nhớ, xót xa cho tình yêu. Nuối tiếc trọn đời. Nhưng nay hết rồi, hai người hai lối, lúc đêm buồn không ai. Tôi gói yêu thương xin trao trả ân tình về người tôi yêu mến. Đừng thương tiếc chi anh, chuyện hai chúng mình là giấc mơ trong cuộc đời. Tình mình này chết như lá úa thu rơi, đường trần mồ côi tôi lạnh lùng ôm kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Tuy đã xa nhau rồi nhưng không bao giờ quên anh. Cho đến hôm nay với nức nở nghẹn ngào, mình mềm lòng xa nhau. Còn đâu những đêm anh dìu tôi lối về, buồn kể nhau nghe chuyện đời. Tình mình này chết như lá úa thu rơi, đường trần mồ côi tôi lạnh lùng ôm kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Ngơ ngác trong đêm trường tôi chứa vơi niềm yêu thương. Nhớ lúc chia phôi cầm tay chưa nói hết bao nhiêu niềm thương của tuổi xuân vừa tròn. Xa nhau mấy người không buồn không nhớ, xót xa cho tình yêu. Nuối tiếc xa xôi, ngày xưa anh nói vẫn yêu em nghìn năm, vẫn đợi em trọn đời. Nhưng nay hết rồi, hai người hai lối, lúc đêm buồn không ai. Tôi gói yêu thương xin trao trả ân tình về người tôi yêu mến. Đừng thương tiếc chi anh, chuyện hai chúng mình là giấc mơ trong cuộc đời. Tình mình này chết như lá úa thu rơi, đường trần mồ côi tôi lạnh lùng ôm kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Tuy đã xa nhau rồi nhưng không bao giờ quên anh. Tình mình này chết như lá úa thu rơi, đường trần mồ côi tôi lạnh lùng ôm kỷ niệm của hai chúng mình. Tuy đã xa nhau rồi nhưng không bao giờ